Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to episode 25 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes. And with me is the man of many T-shirts, Mr. Ken Kelly. How many T-shirts have you got? You have a new T-shirt, Ken, every time I see you for the recording session.
Well, as I say, Rory, I pick them specifically for our podcasts to entertain our listeners. What do you think of the sound of this T-shirt, everybody? It's great to be here. And we've got another really good packed episode for you today with some really interesting topics. Just to kind of point out, Rory and I have been having a bit of a chat, a preamble as we do before we kind of launch into the podcast itself. And we've been having a healthy debate before we even start. So we've got some good fiery, well, not really fiery, but some interesting topics to bring today. We're going to be starting off with one that can be sometimes confusing. It's links into person-centered theory, and it is introjected values and how introjected values differ maybe from conditions of worth, what the difference is, how to spot those introjected values. Real interesting one today, Rory. You're going to be speaking about Gerard Egan, so you're kind of erring on skills in theory, which is an interesting direction there.
Yeah, I'm kind of stealing your thunder a bit, Ken. But yeah, Gerard Egan, apart from being one of the very few theorists who's actually still alive, I looked him up on Wikipedia this morning, and he's still alive. I think he's 89. He is quite an underrated contributor to the world of counselling and psychotherapy, because you don't often hear him quoted in the mainstream. So I'm going to bring you Gerard Egan and his really great contribution to the world of counselling and psychotherapy. We use him, but we don't know we're using him, is what I would say, Ken.
Because I recognised the name when you brought it, but I'm really interested to hear the a little bit more depth on that one, Rory. And then in person-centered business, I'm just a follow-on from last week, Rory. I'm just going to be speaking more about websites today, more focused down on what you should have on a website. How many pages do you need? What pages should you have? So just a simple overview of that on website. And then we're going to end with an interesting debate on gender. So really keying into equality and diversity, but focusing on gender, which is an interesting topic, I guess.
It is, Ken, and one that perennially gets people in a muddle. So we're going to try and put some clarity into that, hopefully.
So starter for 10, as they sometimes say, introjected values. What's your thoughts on that, Rory?
Well, my wife works at Tesco, and I go and collect her, I'll pick her up from work. And when I walk in, I notice there's a magazine rack, and it sells all the popular magazines. And on those racks are women's magazines. And when I say women's magazines, of course, anybody can buy them, but they are, they're marketed to women. And they're all photoshopped images of women with perfect teeth and perfect complexions and perfect eyes. And for any of us, and Ken and myself know this also well, we can look at most images and say where the Photoshop's been put in. And, I was wandering in the other day and I thought, that is a rack of introjected values. Yeah. That is clear message. It's a message that's being projected out from the magazine rack. This is what women should look like. That's from the magazine's perspective. Yeah. And it's all over. And in fact, I just finished reading a book by Naomi Klein called The Beauty Myth. And the whole beauty industry is worth billions of pounds. And if you pick a copy of Naomi Klein's The Beauty Myth up, you'll find that she explains it. It's a really, really interesting book, and it's actually Naomi Wolf. I apologise.
Nice, interesting
on that, but it is The Beauty Myth. So those are introjected values. In other words, they're values that are put on us. They can be sometimes put on us by parents, but Rogers realised they could be put on us by society. Society's put on them, and as a former child therapist who worked in a school. I can't think of how many times this idea that children only felt they were valued if they got the dreaded A to C.
Yeah.
And that, again, is an introjected value.
Yeah.
And we're surrounded by them. We're absolutely surrounded by them, Ken.
We are. So I guess if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, what is it? It's a foreign word to you, introjected value. It is a person-centered counselling theoretical. It's from the person-centered approach to counselling model developed by Carl Rogers. As you mentioned there, Rory, and it basically, an introjected value was something that Carl Rogers recognized as getting in the way from us being our true organismic self, being our true self, because we adopt the values of others as our own values. They're introjected, they're kind of pushed in by somebody else, but we see them as our own truths. And it is only when we start, I guess, challenging these introjected values and asking, are they really my truth, or has this been handed to me by my parents, by society, whatever it is? Do we have the ability to kind of maybe remove that? And moving more towards the true organismic self is about removing those introjected values and conditions of worth. So there's a bit of the theory behind it, very basically put, I have to say. You can learn more about that on counsellingtutor.com, which is our website. And I recognize that as children, the introjected values that we take on can very much be our parents' truths. They will say something and the child will take that on and go into later life saying this is how it is without questioning it. We don't question introjected values, and interestingly, they are unseen to us. And even when we can logically see around it, you're speaking about beauty, the beauty myth, seeing those magazines, we can hold that magazine and clearly see that as a photoshopped woman who probably spends most of their time in the gym, starving themselves or following a very strict diet, and we know that it is manufactured, but yet part of us can still feel, I guess, that we don't match up, that we don't quite fit it, even though we can mentally rationalize it. Those values are so strong, they emotionally kind of really link into who we are.
Yeah, we buy into them, and you know, there's nothing inherently wrong with women working out and, you know, wanting to exercise their right to be who they are. But and I'm not saying that you were saying that, Ken, but with introjected values, what can happen is that we believe it forms our self-concept. Our self-concept is how we view ourselves phenomenologically, how we see ourselves in the world. And, you know, certainly in person-centered therapy, self-concept is an amalgam. It's a mixture of our own experience, and that experience is driven from how other people feed back to us. And, you know, Rogers talked about having three positions. One was our concept of self and our self-concept, but our concept of self is slightly different. It comes from who we really are and who we want to become. So there's three positions in Rogers' theory, which is really interesting.
It is.
And it can lead into all sorts of interesting connections in the therapy room where people begin to realise they don't have to be who they have been told they have to be. They can be who they want to be. And that is what we call self-actualization. And I have to say, Ken, our friends in the TA world call introjected values and conditions of worth drivers and injunctions.
Yeah.
And they talk about, you know, life scripts. And it all boils down to the same thing. We can be conditioned to believing a myth of ourselves.
Yeah. And it's interesting, you know, because there's often some confusion about an introjected value. What is an introjected value and what is a condition of worth? So an introjected value is that value that is kind of slid in, unseen to self, given by someone else. A condition of worth is you are worthy if you reach a certain condition. If certain criteria are met, you are more worthy. So how they can maybe work together is an example of, we were speaking about this a little earlier, where a little boy falls over and he hurts his knee and he goes to his mum and he's crying because his internal voice, his organismic self is crying out, and he's pointing at the blood on his knee and he's sobbing away, and his mum says, oh, come on, big boys don't cry. Big boys don't cry. Come here, big boys don't cry. Your mummy's big boy now. And therefore saying, don't trust your organismic self. Don't listen to that organismic self that is crying. I'm going to tell you an introjected value, and that value is that big boys don't cry. So there's the introjected value. So here is the condition of worth when 2 days later he falls off his bike and he skins his other knee. And he runs to his mum and he's holding in that emotion. He's not going to cry. He's not going to cry because big boys don't cry. And he goes to his mum and he points and his little mouth is pulling down, but he's not crying. And his mum goes, you see, there's mummy's big boy. You're not crying. Oh, who's brave? Therefore, you are worthy if you meet the condition of not crying. And there is that condition of worth goes really parallels with the introjected values. And so we see them roll out across our lives.
Absolutely can. And you see it on so many levels. And it was just hearing that. It was my father who was a soldier who used to say big boys don't cry. So it could come from anywhere. But what happens is it builds a tension up with someone that they carry through their lives. And how often have we seen, Ken, where as therapists we provide that unconditional positive regard, that non-judgmental environment, and our clients then can be who they want to be.
Yep.
They are, as Rogers described, that person they want to become, and it is just incredible. I have witnessed for just incredible transformations of people who realise that it is okay to be who they feel they are. That's one of the greatest gifts of therapy.
It is, isn't it? I love it. And I'm getting all excited now and warm and glowy because that is what therapy is. Well, in the person-centered approach, you provide a threat-free environment for that client where the conditions of worth and the introjected values get to be explored, and you are just there as a constant without judgment, no matter what they bring, which allows them to not just look for approval, but to seek around that and really question that. It's such a privilege to do what we do. But I'm getting carried away now, and we've got lots to bring, including going on to theory with Rory and speaking a little bit about Gerard Egan, who is a great contributor, and maybe we don't hear the name quite enough, Rory.
We don't. Gerard Egan, apart from being one of the very few theorists who's still alive, himself and Aaron Beck, he really has contributed to the world of counselling and psychotherapy. And without his contribution, and I'm going to be really bold here, I would say that a lot of the content of modern counselling courses wouldn't be able to be delivered because there was an interesting comment from Professor Mick Cooper to a colleague of mine, and he was discussing about person-centred training, and he said very few courses now person-centred. And I really got that because Rogers didn't particularly use a lot of skills. It was very much about process. If you watch any of his video, any of the films that have been made into videos, such as Gloria, such as him working with other clients and process groups, he's all about the phenomenological process of how people experience. But he uses very, very few skills. And that is where Gerard Egan comes in. And most modern counsellors, and here's the bombshell, even if they're training person-centered, they're probably integrative because they're using Egan's model of questioning to some extent and the person-centered approach. So that's a bit of food for thought. I've been controversial there, Kim.
You are indeed. And on that controversial bombshell, let's dive straight into theory with Rory.
Counselling Theory with Rory Lees-Oakes.
Today, I'm going to take you on a trip around the solar system. No, we are not going to take a trip to Mars or Alpha Centauri or the moon for that matter. We are going to meet one of the great contributors in the development of counselling skills, Gerard Egan. He's currently Professor Emeritus of Psychology and Organisation Development at Loyola University in Chicago in the United States of America. In 1975, Egan published a book called The Skilled Helper. It went on to become one of the most widely read books on counselling and communication skills ever written. Building on the ideas of Carl Rogers and Robert Karkoff's observations on high-functioning helpers. And eagle-eared listeners will recognise Karkoff as the co-inventor of the empathy scale, and I've talked about him in the podcast before. Egan developed a non-coercive way of helping people reach their own ambitions and goals, rather than being told what to do or forced into decisions by their helper. Egan described his technique in The Skilled Helper as, the goals of using the model are to help people to manage their problems in living more effectively and developed unused opportunities more fully, and to help people become better at helping themselves in everyday lives. To achieve this, the Egan model helps clients to address three main questions. What's going on? What do I want instead? And how might I get to what I want? And Egan's model is seen in three distinct stages or processes. So stage one is sometimes known as the current scenario. And in that, the first part of it is the story. So as anybody who's a therapist or used counselling skills or been a helper knows, that the beginning of any kind of counsellor-client or helper-client relationship is the client speaking about their story, and this is sometimes known as what's going on for the person. As the story unfolds, we come to blind spots in the model, and that's what's really going on. So the first part of the current scenario is using the skill of silence to listen to the client, to get an idea of where they're at, maybe asking a few questions. And then as we go into blind spots, this is where we use reflecting and paraphrasing. And sometimes clients can come to us with stories, and when we reflect them back, they don't realise actually what they've said because it's been reworded to them. They think, oh right, that's what's going on. I didn't realise I was doing that or saying that, or that was a possibility. So even in this early part of Egan's model, we can see that he's developing the use of skills to quite a high level to help the model work. And then finally, in this first phase, is leverage. He called it leverage. And actually what we're talking about is the skills of focusing and prioritising. The idea that sometimes when clients come to us, they have a lot of issues sometimes. And a good use of skills is to use the skill of focusing. So a client will be asked to really say to a client, okay, so what is it that's causing you the most problems? And they may say, well, it's this. And it's really interesting, and certainly in my practice experience, is when you get one particular issue they want to work on, usually the other issues are either connected to it or they just fall out of awareness to the client as they work on the real issue that's causing them difficulty. And it's sometimes that skill of which issue would you want to work with first, what's causing you the major difficulties, is sometimes referred to as the skill of focusing or prioritising. In the second stage of Egan's model, we'll call that the preferred scenario. This is where we're exploring possibilities. So in this, we'll be using certainly the skill of questioning, reflecting and paraphrasing. And then we move to what's called the change agenda. And this is setting SMART goals. Now, SMART's an acronym, S-M-A-R-T, and SMART stands for specific. So what and why would be a question. So what is it you hope to achieve and why do you hope you're going to achieve that? Measurable. So part of a SMART target is how you're going to measure success. What does it look like? What does the change look like? Achievable. Again, that's a how question. How are you going to do this? What are you going to put in place to achieve that? Realistic. And this is about asking people or asking them to consider how they're going to reach their goal. Is it realistic that they can get to their goal? And finally, time bound. This is about how long do you think it's going to take you? What's a realistic time frame for people or yourself to get to where you need to be? And then eventually commitment. So once we've done the SMART targets, we need to check the goals are right. So again, reflecting and paraphrasing, checking the goals are correct and saying to people, is this what you want to do? And it does form a commitment. Yes, I want to do that. So, okay, we've got a plan. And then finally in the scenario are action strategies. Now, they're possible actions. So how many ways are there to get to your destination? So maybe if you've got a client who wants to do a particular career, it might be there are different qualification paths that they can get to it. Might be someone wants to raise their self-esteem. So again, there may be very different paths of doing that and very different ways that a client could raise their self-esteem. Same for anxiety, many different ways of managing anxiety and so on and so forth. In the third stage, we'd also be looking at best fit strategies. So lots of strategies could be discussed, but actually the client might say, actually, that one fits better for me. That one feels like it's the right fit, and that's the one I'll use. And then finally is the plan. So this is about putting all the previous work together and putting a plan in place that the client can stick to, and then they can come back and see where they're at with it. So it's a very structured model, Egan's model, and it does fit, as I'll talk about, to some other therapies better than person-centered therapy. And yes, it does sound quite directive because it is. So Egan also believed that first impressions were lasting impressions. So he put a big stock onto how the client viewed the therapist, because trust in the therapist's skill and integrity is a huge part in positive outcomes in therapy. If a client thinks the therapist in front of them isn't listening or isn't very good or doesn't care, what could happen is the relationship breaks down, and really once the relationship's broken down, it's pretty much the end of that therapy relationship with that therapist. So Egan believed that there are certain things that must be present within the therapist, certain therapist behaviours, to instill that confidence in the client. So in other words, how the therapist or the helper presents themselves to the client can have a significant impact on the therapeutic or helping relationship. And this brings us back to the solar system I talked about earlier on. Egan introduced the acronym SOLAR to remind us of how we present ourselves and give the client confidence in both our professionalism and our ability to form a working alliance. And I would also say our ability to listen. And SOLAR is, first of all, sitting squarely. So this is about the helper sitting squarely on the seat, looking like they're ready to attend to the client, to listen to the client's difficulty. And the word present is used here, being present, not being distracted or looking out the window or tapping on a mobile phone, being there and present for the client. The second in the solar system is an open posture. So I don't think anybody would want to sit in front of a therapist who's got their arms crossed and the legs crossed and are looking like a rather grumpy school teacher. You know, having an open posture is really important. And that doesn't mean that we kind of spray ourselves out like a starfish in the therapy room. But what it does mean is that we show an open body language, you know, and that we're inviting in terms of how we address the client and how we interact with the client's difficulties. So that's an open posture. Then there's the L in the solar, which is leaning forward and looking genuinely interested in what the client is communicating to you. And this is sometimes referred to as active listening. I think few people realise that active listening just isn't about the listening phase. The active part is looking interested. Plenty of people listen, but actively listening is slightly different. It's almost as if this person really, really, really is interested in your story. And if you're a therapist, you should be interested in the client's story. And then there's E in the solar system, which is effective eye contact without staring. So this is always a bit of a difficult one because eye contact, certainly in Western societies, is considered really important. You know, we hear the John Wayne westerns of look me in the eye and that type of thing. And it's considered in Western societies a sign of honesty. However, we've got to be very careful that we don't stare at clients so they look like they're being hypnotized, unless they're being hypnotized, of course, or that we don't think culturally. Some clients from, you know, Asian communities see eye contact as a bit disrespectful or a sign of aggression in some cases. So we need to be thoughtful on the eye contact. But generally speaking, eye contact, making sure you're attending, which is another counselling skill, looking at the client is really, really important. And the R, finally, is relax. Don't rush the client. Nobody wants to be sitting with a therapist who's tapping, looking at the watch, or looking out the window, or thinking about wanting to go home. Relax is about providing that relaxing environment that a client can feel that they can take the time to explore their process and their story. So that's solar. And I'll just go over it again. Sitting squarely, an open posture, leaning forward and looking genuinely interested, and relaxing. And eye contact. So Egan's model slots nicely into CBT, TA and integrative approaches, because Egan's model is directive, because it is a strategy-based model. And it also forms the basis of motivational interviewing. And it's a technique used by healthcare professionals such as doctors, nurses, care staff and support workers. And some of the techniques could fit within the person-centered approach. Certainly the use of solar fits nicely into person-centered approach, because you're using a lot of skills in there. But some people would, I say, argue that it's a little bit more directive. However, few would dispute that the solar model forms the basis of modern counselling skills and helping behaviours. And I think it's really interesting. And certainly when I taught counselling, I would show films, because it was films in that time, not videos, of Carl Rogers working with clients. And he used very few counselling skills. He used very, very, very few counselling skills. What he used was a lot of process, a lot of those core conditions, or they called core conditions, of empathy and congruence and unconditional positive regard. But if you watch any of his interactions, he uses very, very few skills. He doesn't use a lot of questioning either. So you could say that the Egan model maybe doesn't fit directly into Rogers' model, but it uses a lot of his ideas, and skills such as attending, active listening, reflecting and paraphrasing, use of questions, silence as a way of helping the client to gather their thoughts are all really part of modern day counselling techniques, which have been influenced by the world of Gerard Egan. And also they form the kind of attitudes and behaviours that we would want from someone who's a counsellor.
Thanks again, Rory. Always bring great content through with Rory. And there's some learning there for me. I didn't realise that Gerard Egan had contributed so much to the skills that I use on a daily basis. It was not even in my awareness. And I think sometimes there's almost a sadness in that people are revered and celebrated for their works when they're dead. And we have people, contributors right now that are still living, and I think that is a great treasure. Absolutely, Ken. And and I think most trainers have a copy of Gerard Egan's book, A Skilled Helper. I've got one on the shelf, and I know that quite a few of my training colleagues have a copy of it. So on today, Ken, with websites, and it's person-centered business with Ken. And they're easy to build, Ken. I've seen people on the TV who can build a website in 10 minutes, and it must be right because it's on the TV, Ken. Isn't that so? Yeah, and usually linked to some advert where you're going to be paying some fee on a monthly basis. Well, last week we looked at the different options you have if you did want to build a website yourself versus kind of outsourcing that and getting somebody in. And today it's just a very brief overlook of what content you should have on a website. What do you need as a counsellor, as a psychotherapist on your website? And even if you're running an agency, what should be there? And there's a little template that I'll be sharing of how many pages you need and what should be on those pages. So without any further ado, person-centered business.
Person-centered business with Kenneth Kelly.
Today I was hoping we might take a look at content that you might put on your website. And in last week's episode, we spoke about the different options from free and template-based to building it yourself to outsourcing your website. And today, what should be on a website? How many pages should you have on a website? So the thing about a website is that it represents you and it represents your practice. So it's really worth having a think and it's worth considering. And a lot of the content, in other words, the words that you will write on your website, if you've been following the person-centered business sections that I've been doing in the Counselling Tutor podcast, well, you'll already have picked up a whole pile of things that you'll be able to use here. So we started by speaking about an elevator pitch. Elevator pitch is where you can define your offer. Well, that would go right at the top on your homepage. When somebody comes in, you would instantly be saying who you are, what you do, and why it matters to them. If you have gone and looked at brochures and how we create the content for the brochures, all we've done there is we've expanded on that initial boiled down, distilled offer that we have. And that's what we're going to be doing on our website. We're just going to be expanding on that offer. So I'm just going to give you a formula of some basic pages that you might like to have on your website and kind of what their functionality is. And we're going to start off with the home page. So I'll just go over them quickly. We're going to look at the home page. We're going to look at an about page. We're going to look at a contact page. And then we're going to look at some information pages. So let's start that home page. The homepage of a website is very often the page that people will come into for the first time. It's kind of the front door of your website. So the homepage tends to be a very general overview of who you are and what you offer. And you want to kind of condense that so that you're not going into too much detail. When someone's looking at the home page, you're giving them the opportunity to maybe click a link or click a button or click a tab within your menu to get more information. But you're looking to just give a very general overview and feel of your philosophy, your practice, who you are, how you practice, what you offer, what you can and what you cannot do right there on your home page. You're looking to create a relationship. It's a conversation that from the moment that the client or potential client lands on your website and they are engaging within your content, there's a conversation going. You're speaking to them and there's a process going on, I guess, within their thoughts. So there's kind of a conversation going on. So it might be worth thinking about the words that you use there, how you want to welcome them, and where they might be when they arrive at your website. So just starting saying that you are a therapist, a psychotherapist, what area you work in and what kind of things you deal with, that would be a great opening. But then it may be looking to address them, something along the lines of, I guess that there are people who may come to this website, they may feel trapped, they may feel helpless, they may feel that there is no hope, and I recognize that. So kind of trying to look from maybe a person-centered point of view of recognizing where they might be at when they come to your website. So that's your home page. It's a general overview of what you offer, and I would suggest if you can, put a nice picture, something that they will be able to relate to on your home page. The next page, which is really important, is the about page. So that may say about me or just about. And the about page is very often visited. So if somebody comes into your website, they have a look over your website and they think, wow, yeah, maybe this is somebody I want to work with. Then they want to know more about who you are. And then they might go to the About Me page. Now, I just want to put something in. About Me pages are generally incorrect on websites that I look at. I do marketing consultancy and I look at About Me pages all the time. And About Me pages are usually used as a platform to somebody to stand on and say, let me tell you all about me and my story and how I'm doing what I'm doing. And I suggest to you that an About Me page should not be about you, but more about how you are more able to help the person that is coming into your website. So a client coming into your website, they're potentially in a really difficult place in their life. They're looking around, they think, yeah, maybe I'd like to work with this person. And they come to your About page. How do you speak to them? How do you communicate with them? How do you let them know that you hear them and that you recognize them? And sure, you're going to talk about your qualifications. Sure, you're going to talk about any specialization that you might do, but in a way that meets their needs rather than just listing qualifications. I graduated in such and such from such and such with such and such and then I went on to do such and such and such and such is very factual and listing, whereas I feel that I can help people with such and such because of my studies in such and such is more person-centered and I guess more where they might be at. So it's about maybe having a look at an empathic way of putting across who you are. I always suggest put a photograph on your About page, an up-to-date photograph that looks like you look now, so that they're not looking at a photograph that was maybe taken 25 years ago. When they meet you in person, that there's a mismatch or an incongruence in that. And that will give you your overview, I guess, of your About page. Really important page for a website is a contact page. It's what do they do if they want to get hold of you, and it needs to be there, it needs to be bold, and it needs to be bright, because what you don't want is for a person to get to your website, start reading through your content, going, wow, this is somebody I'd certainly like to work with, and then making them look and search to be able to get hold of you. So put your contact details big and bold in a place that is easy to find, and usually that would be a page that is contact us, contact me, and on there all you're going to do is you're going to give the methods that the person can contact you, and try to vary the methods that somebody can use to contact you as well. You might have a contact form. If you do have a contact form, please be mindful that somebody may be putting where they're at in that contact form. So you need to look at the confidentiality. How is that stored? How is that data transferred to make sure that that their confidentiality is upheld? You might put a telephone number on there, should you choose to. You might have an email address that they can use to contact you. So you would put varying contact methods on your website, and of course when you're asking a client to contact you, it may well be that you're not able to take their call, or you're not able to be there when they initially make that contact with you. So it's maybe a good idea on your contact form to outline how you will get back to them. I will gladly phone you back if I'm not available, and you leave a message. I will gladly phone you back if that is appropriate for you. If that is not appropriate for you, please suggest a more appropriate form of communication. Maybe somebody might take a chance to give you a call, but they don't want you phoning them back because maybe they're in a home where they don't want anybody else to know that they are considering counselling. So it's worth taking that into consideration when you have a look at your contact form. Here's an interesting one, fees. On my website, I've got a great big button and it says fees. So often I see on websites, the fees are hidden away. And I don't understand why that is. Your fee is your fee. And it may well be that you offer a sliding scale. That's fine. At least put it on your website. You can say my fees start at, or I have a sliding scale, but do not be afraid to put your fees on your website. People want to know. It's about transparency, and they shouldn't have to dig around for that. There is sometimes a fear that if I put my fees on, then people are going to go, oh, then I don't want to deal with you. The opposite is true. When you're looking to buy something, or you're looking to get some information off something, and you go on the internet, you want to know how much it is. And if they chase you around, kind of almost promising you're going to find the fees here, and you go and look and you don't find the fees, it just leaves you frustrated. So you don't want to do that with your customers. So I have a page on my website for fees, which says how it works, where we meet, how much it costs, what happens if they can't make the sessions, how many sessions they may need, how do they pay, and how do they book a session. So those are just some headlines that I have on my fees page. So highly recommended. Make your fees loud and proud and easy to find on your website. And then apart from that, you might want to put what your style is, a little bit more about your style, maybe what counselling is, what they can expect from you. You kind of almost set the expectations. And again, it's about empowering this client to have choice. And it may well be that the modality you offer doesn't quite suit them. Well, let's outline that modality on our website so that they can make that informed choice and go, no, this is not for me, I'll go to someone else, or yes, this is for me. So we're going to put that on the website, and I've put that under my style, which I kind of head up with some information about my counselling style. And when I write in the first person because I'm an individual offering counselling services to other individuals. I'm not working as an organisation. So I speak in my voice. So I wouldn't say Kenneth Kelly has been a counsellor since blah, blah, blah. I will say I have been doing counselling since blah, 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 because it is a conversation which I gladly have with the visitor to the site. So on my style, I've got what is counselling, what type of counselling do I offer, what kind of things can you bring to counselling? Am I weak if I need counselling? I think that's a really important one. You know, so often we know with our clients that going and asking for help is maybe for them, from their frame of reference, considered a weakness, a total failure, such a failure, in fact, that I can't sort this out for myself and I have to reach out to someone else. And just having some reassuring words that reaching out to a counsellor is not a sign of weakness, but an extreme sign of strength. It really is. There's such courage is taken when somebody reaches out to speak to a counsellor. It can be really reassuring for the people that visit your website. And then I got one more page on my website, which is how it works. And how it works, I try to describe in as much detail as I can the process. What does the process look like? How does it work? And you know, all of this that we're talking about now, if you're studying counselling, you're still there as a student, you're covering this all the time. You're asked in assignments, what is your philosophy? How are you choosing to work with your clients? And it's going to be your practice. It's going to be defining who you are. And I get it that we study modalities which are similar. Person-centered trainee is a person-centered trainee. Someone who studies TA is a TA therapist. But even though we may have our set modalities, we're still individuals within those modalities. And we are us. We bring us to our counselling. So bring you to your website to say who you are, how it works with you, and kind of share a little bit of who they get when they come to your counselling rooms. So there you go, just a brief overview of what you might put on a website. It doesn't have to have hundreds and hundreds of pages, just those few pages. Think of a website at the end of the day and try and see it through the eyes of the person who is visiting, someone who is potentially in distress, looking for help. See it from their eyes as opposed to through your eyes of wanting to put your counselling services forward. And if you look at it through their eyes, you will always be guided by your clients, and that way you know that you will always be on target. And I hope that this has been of some use to you.
Thank you for that, Ken. So I'm just going to make some notes. I'm going to remove all the singing and dancing from my website and all the pictures and all the little graphics. What you're really saying is that the content is so important. It needs to be clear, it needs to be well laid out, and it needs to be fastly accessible at speed for people to look at. Yeah.
And the interesting thing there, Rory, sorry I'm interrupting you there, is that that is just respectful for the client. But the interesting thing is, if you look at the requirements of Google, that's what Google wants as well, to rank your website well. As soon as the Google hits your website and you've got this flash animation introduction page, they just leave because that doesn't work anymore. That's not considered useful for people that will be visiting your website. Get the information over in the simplest way possible. No singing, no dancing, no flash animation graphics.
And you're right, Ken. Ken takes care of our websites and has taught me valuable lessons, with which I'm eternally grateful. Not always easy, I have to say, but valuable lessons about how to write content. Because, as you rightly say, Ken, Google is the really only place in town to be found. There are different search engines, but Google is by far the biggest, and it has really, really strict criteria about how it ranks your page and where it puts it on the searches.
Indeed. So moving on to our debate topic today, and it's an interesting one because it can bring up confusion, stumbling, and that is gender.
Absolutely, Ken. I was driving home from a lecture that I was doing, and I heard a very interesting Radio 4 discussion about someone being gender neutral. And it was a person who had yet to decide which gender they were. Non-binary was the term used. Not male, not female. And it was really, really interesting from the perspective of the person themselves was quite sure of who they were, in that they weren't sure of who they were, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So they were sure that they didn't identify particularly with as a male gender, and they didn't identify with a female gender, and they were really happy in the world. It was everybody else around them that seemed to have a big problem, like whose toilet is he going to use, what uniform are you going to wear, how are we going to address you, all that kind of thing. And gender is an interesting one. So I did some research on this, and it has actually come up in the Facebook page. And if you want to join our Facebook community, go to www.counsellingtutor.com, 2 L's, we spell it in the English way. And if you go into counsellingtutor.com, you'll see a button on the right-hand side. It says Facebook. Press that, and we will let you in. It's a closed group. Knock on the door. We'll let you in with pleasure, and you can join all the other students. I think it's about 2,500.
Over 3,000.
Over 3,000.
Over 3,000, yes.
I need to pay more attention. And they're talking about really good topics, really interesting topics, and gender came up. So when I decided to do some research on gender, I went to the World Health Organization, and I discovered that the World Health Organization consider gender as a kind of societal stamp. It means it's a construct, and I'm going to use a great word here: taxonomy.
Oh,
that's a word, taxonomy. And a taxonomy is a catalogue. It's a way of cataloguing people. And the word actually comes from the French. It comes from the French, and interestingly enough, it also finds its roots in Lexus as well, the French, the Latin word. So it is a catalogue, and there's different views on gender. It is incredibly confusing, Cam. Absolutely incredibly.
I'm confused. And when we're looking at equality and diversity, it's something that we need to pay attention to, but it can be confusing. And I think even your research has brought up confusion. It's not clearly defined. Who decides? Is it decided against a catalogue, or is it the individual themselves that decides?
Absolutely, and I think you've hit on the point here that you can read lots and lots and lots into gender. There's a feminist version or a feminist idea of gender. There's all sorts of different ideas in gender. But if you get a client who's discussing it, the best way of finding out what it means to them is to say, what does that mean to you? Yeah. Yes. And work with how they view their world. And I think one of the big tripping up points, and one of the kind of blind sides that therapists can have, is that when they hear a word, gender or sexuality, they immediately put their own view of it on. And when you've got your view and your client sat there and they've got their view, you're missing each other. Yeah. Absolutely missing each other. So I would say that it's another one of those words where what you have to do is kind of find what it means for the client.
Yeah, it's about the client's frame of reference on what they're bringing as opposed to your frame of reference. And it can be confusing. It's studying it, and it's. I guess we discussed it a little earlier, Rory, and we said it's phenomenological in a way, because it's based on how the individual interacts with their world, how they perceive that, and how it is for them. And we need to respect that. So we can't take something like gender as being a stamp or something that we as counsellors can look up in a catalogue, because it's about what the person in front of us feels about it, how they see it, and that is where we work. So I like what you're saying there of ask them. Just
it sounds too straightforward to be true, doesn't it? But ask them, and once you've found out what they view it as, then they've opened the door for you then to explore it. If it comes up, I'm not saying that when you meet your client for the first time and you've done your contract, you say, by the way, what gender are you? That would be completely wrong. Yeah. But it can come up, and it's a discussion I'm hearing more and more about when I listen on the radio, when I'm looking in newspapers, when I'm talking to colleagues. It seems to be a conversation that more people are having, as I guess we're moving into a society where the old structures of you are this and this is how you will be are starting to fade, and people, really are, as Rogers, eloquently put it, the people of tomorrow, where people can say, actually, I don't fit here and I don't fit there, this is where I fit, and this is how I view my world. And that is phenomenology.
And it's powerful, and it keys in. See what we've done, Rory. Unknowingly, unwittingly, we've done a full circle. We started off with looking at introjected values, and it may well be, that somebody grows up and the values of who they are and what their gender is are introjected heavily from parents, from friends, from uncles, from aunties, from grandparents, and from the world itself of what kind of clothes they should wear, whether that be pants or a dress. All of this is introjected throughout our lives, and it may well be that you can find yourself working with a client at some stage where in a threat-free environment, they get to challenge introjected values, and they may be on a journey of discovery and finding who they are. It's just interesting. We just got to be open, I guess.
Absolutely, Ken. And as a very young man who used to work for a photographic company, I will tell you a little story about a lesson that I learned. I went to see a client who did aerial photography, and it was a husband and wife operation, and we got chatting, and it was a long time ago, as he puts his defence in quickly. It was a long time ago, and I got chatting, and I've never met them before, and I said to the female part of the business, if you like, I said, how long have you been into photography? And she looked at me and she said, I know nothing about photography. And I said, well, how do you take the pictures? And she said, I don't, I'm the pilot. And it was like, right, that is a strong life lesson. I just naturally assumed, I was a younger man, that because she was a woman, she wasn't the pilot. And of course, Amelia Earhart led the way with that, really. Yes. So I should have known better. But it's amazing how people can make judgments, and there you go.
Yeah, and part of becoming a counsellor, a psychotherapist, going into that helping line of work is challenging exactly what you've just brought there. And you know what? There's no shame in what you thought there, because you were a product of who you were at that time, and the product of how the world kind of gives us these messages. And I guess as therapists, we have to challenge that and think more of the person who is in front of us and what they see and who they really are. I think it's all just exciting, and it's great learning, and I know I learn more from my clients than I ever did in training, Rory. It's interesting. You go to training, you learn all this, and you go out into practice, and then your clients just teach you stuff. You think, wow, this is incredible. But just
never
constant. Yeah, very much so. And we just keep on coming back to what an absolute privilege it is to be in counselling, in psychotherapy. What an episode. I've loved it.
It's great, isn't it? We've covered so much, Ken. And as you say, we went the full circle. We went back to introjected values and conditions of worth, which of course gender is. So that just about wraps this episode up of the Counsellor Tutor podcast. So as always, my final message, like the man in Hill Street Blues, is stay grounded and stay safe.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.